Good evening. Well, the pandemic has been used to encourage us all to work from home. A new way of working, home working, flexible working, and we're all going to be just as productive as we were when we went to the office and worked in teams. I've always thought the whole thing is a complete load of nonsense in the vast majority of cases, but it's something that's been embraced by the civil service. Yes, absolutely. The last estimate is that only 20% of civil servants are back in their London offices. And indeed, a survey conducted a few months ago into the Civil Service Union discovered that 7 out of 10 civil service officials want their post-pandemic working to include 3 days a week from home and just twice in the office. Well, I think a symptom of this has been exposed by Raphael Marshall, the whistleblower, who spoke to the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, and he talked about the withdrawal from Afghanistan, saying that at times he was the sole person in the office dealing with the Afghan inbox. And these are people, and I'm not sure, that every single person that said they wanted to come to the UK was genuine, but there were many thousands of people during those 20 years that did work for the British forces whose lives were directly under threat by the takeover of Kabul by the Taliban. Worse still with this culture, Sir Philip Barton, the boss. And here's a picture of him, a classic sort of chinless wonder who's had a wonderful career in the civil service. He, of course, has already got his knighthood, his guaranteed pension. Think about this. He was the senior civil servant there in the Foreign Office. Kabul fell on the 15th of August with all of the ensuing chaos. And guess when he came back to work? Well, he came back to work on the 26th of August. Jolly well done, Sir Philip. Absolutely marvellous. No, I think the whole thing is a complete and utter disgrace. There are other questions too. Pen Farthing, who managed to evacuate 150 dogs. And it said with the whistleblower that this was a priority for Boris Johnson. Well, look, we all love dogs, but I don't think that was specifically one of our war aims. Even worse than that, in the Foreign Office in Kabul, details of Afghanis, their addresses, were left in the British Embassy and were not destroyed. So the question tonight I want to debate with you is, should the civil service get back to the office? I'd love your views on this. Maybe I've got this wrong. Maybe home working is the future. Tell me what you think. Please, GBViews at GBnews.uk, or you can tweet at GBnews. Now, all of this was put to the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, this morning, who responded thus.
Did not put the welfare of animals above individuals, and I think you can see that in the facts of 15,000 people evacuated in just 2 weeks. As I said, biggest effort operation in living memory, and only the US got more out. Look, I think it's an incredibly difficult situation. We would have wanted a longer time window in order to get out everyone who was eligible. But even after the evacuation, I saw this for myself, we were working to get flights out of Kabul with Qatar. We were working with regional partners to make sure that we could take British nationals and those that we had said that we would take. We did everything we could. And again, I say, come back to the point, 15,000 people evacuated in 2 weeks. Never been done before, certainly not in my living memory, and only the United States got more people out. I think that was actually a record that those involved, particularly those working on the ground, should be proud of. We always said that we were up against this timeline, that a combination of the US deadline and the Taliban's approach to it, that we were working to an expedited deadline. And look, that put pressure on the evacuation plan. But we'd been planning for this since well before, since January, and indeed again in April. We changed the travel advice. Those schemes like the app scheme were being set up. But of course, if we'd have had extra time, we would have prolonged that period.
So there's the official response, the establishment closing ranks, saying everything's absolutely fine. We managed to get 15,000 people out. The whistleblower, well, Raphael was saying that basically thousands of emails weren't even read. Now, as I said earlier, I'm sure anyone that was anyone wanted to get out of Kabul, and many of those may not have been genuine. But did we actually get the right 15,000 people out? And what is the culture there within the Foreign Office. Well, joining me is somebody with real experience of dealing with the Foreign Office and of Afghanistan. It's Colonel Richard Kemp, retired Army officer who was commander of some British forces in Afghanistan way back in 2003. Colonel Kemp, good evening.
Good evening. A long time ago.
It was a long time ago, but at the end of that 20 years, and of course, you went there to get rid of the Taliban. At the end of the 20 years, Joe Biden pulls the plug. And by the way, far more blame lies with him for what happened than it does with the Foreign Office. I do want to make that clear. But what did you make of what the whistleblower had to say about the culture, the work from home culture, and the fact that the head of the operation, the head of the office, decided not to come back from his holiday until 11 days after Kabul had fallen?
Well, I'm afraid to say that culture rings very, very true with me. I worked in the Cabinet Office for many years, and I worked with all the Whitehall government departments, including the Foreign Office. When we had crises to deal with, and we had several crises during my tenure, not on this scale, but nevertheless significant crises, it was always very difficult to get Whitehall departments, including the Foreign Office, to step up to the mark. Yes, there were some very, very effective people there, very clever people, very hard-working people, some who worked right around the clock. But the culture was not to work 24/7 and keep working till the job's done. It was to work, to have your holiday, to finish your scheduled hours, and to, not to kind of take the military ethos, which is just do it till the job's finished. And I'm afraid it was very hard to whip government officials working in Whitehall into line and try and get them to understand the need to go onto a war footing when actually you've got a wartime situation. So it doesn't surprise me that this is the case still in the Foreign Office today. And as to working from home, I mean, you can't run a crisis in any circumstances working from home. You've got to be in the same place, either in the same room or the same complex. You cannot do it. Just the idea of working from home, running a major crisis like this is just laughable if it wasn't so tragic. And as to the leadership of the Foreign Office, the minute this began to evolve, the permanent secretary of the Foreign Office should have been straight back at work, back behind his desk. How can he expect people to put all the effort in to go the extra mile that is demanded by this situation if he's lying on a beach somewhere?
Well, I must say, his defence that I kept in touch with the office wasn't very convincing to me either. I've certainly had to cancel holidays to come back for business reasons, political reasons. I'm astonished that he decided that 11 days was actually okay. And backing up your point about, a war room situation and you work until the job is done, in fact, they worked 8-hour revolving shifts during that period, whether at home or in the office, because they didn't want staff to burn out. Well, there you are. Other question for you, Richard Kemp. I don't know whether, are you a dog owner?
I'm not a dog owner, no, and I certainly don't think that any priority should have been given to dogs over human beings in Afghanistan. I don't care what the Prime Minister or his wife may have thought or what the British public thought. The procedures and the conditions that were laid down by the Foreign Office for evacuating did not include dogs and should not have included dogs.
No, I mean, look, it was a private plane that took the dogs out, but the argument is that army resources were diverted in helping shelter get them to the aeroplane. So there is a real question around that. And Richard Kemp, finally, the last figures I've got are that 20% of the civil service are back at their desks in London, and that the civil service union themselves, well, 7 out of 10 of their senior people think that here on forever, they should only have to come to the London office 2 days a week. Do we need a very major change of culture, perhaps not just in the Foreign Office, but perhaps that goes through the Ministry of Defence, again, who you've got experience with? Does someone need to shake this whole thing up?
Somebody does need to shake it up. It's a very, very deeply ingrained culture. And I think things like this, we've heard from the whistleblower, Mr. Marshall, the emphasis on work-life balance. We don't want emphasis on work-life balance. We want emphasis on getting the job done. And if that needs working, if necessary, for 12 hours a day or 15 hours a day, whatever it is, then they should do that. The army was called in to help the Foreign Office. because they know soldiers will work the hours they're required to work. It does need shaking up. We don't want people working from home. We don't want virtue signalling about work-life balance. We need people behind their desks doing their job. And the only place that most civil servants can actually do their job, in my view, and I've had a lot of experience of working with civil servants, is behind their desks and getting out sometimes on the ground to see how things are going on the ground as well.
Well, Colonel Kemp, thank you for joining us this evening and giving us your very clear opinion. Well, to you at home, as I say, it could well be that Colonel Kemp and I are just old-fashioned, completely out of touch, but I think the argument that he made there's a compelling one. In a crisis, you need people working together in a high-pressure situation, able to bounce ideas off each other. And I'm absolutely convinced that is how this should have been handled. I'm utterly astonished at the laxitude of much of what went on. And frankly, weak apologies coming afterwards simply aren't good enough. And I never thought I'd say this, but I've always found Dominic Cummings to be a very difficult individual. But one thing he was absolutely right about was the blob, as he described it, the Westminster set that run so much of our policy, so much of our politics, and there's no doubt that Cummings really did want a major shake-up of the civil service. And I worry, with him gone from Downing Street, I worry where that impetus may come from, if at all.